Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our English grammar classes. My name is Mariola Ochotnikova, and we are going today to continue our topic of the tenses. In our previous class, which was uploaded successfully on YouTube, we discussed with you what is the meaning and usage of the present perfect tense. The one that is, I would say, probably the most confusing for most of my students. That's why I actually dedicated the whole class to that. I hope that after having done some exercises and reviving the theory and also watching some movies, reading, analyzing what you hear, what you see, what you understand, why people use that, it becomes, clearer by the day. So today we are going to continue more about the past tenses. I remind you that the present perfect tense is called present for a reason, although we translate all the constructions, pretty much all the constructions, which are in present perfect, we translate them into Slavic languages as the past tense. So when I would say, for example, I have left my keys at home, we would still say in the Slavic languages, ja zostawiłam klucze w domu, ja ostawiła kluczy doma. So this is this like confusing point that when you don't think about the name in the Slavic languages, we would tend to think that this is past, but it is called present perfect because this emphasizes that it has this significance right now, and there is something that we have to do with it right now, or we can make some judgment, opinion, and so on. So that's why this is so much confusing, and this really has no 100% relevant translation into Slavic languages. But as I said, I hope that you now understand more how this works. And what we are going to discuss today is what do we do with the past perfect, which is, in a way, really much easier than present perfect. If you already understand the logic of present perfect, you just kind of mirror that to the past. So how does that go? I'm going to show you my whiteboard as always. Okay. And share. Okay. And okay. I'm sorry. Okay. So let's start for the beginning with one sentence in the present perfect to see what is happening there and then how it works in past perfect. So let's take a very, very common sentence, one of the most common ones, I would say, in the present perfect. When you say, I have never thought of that. If we translate that into Slavic languages, we would say, ja nikada об этом не думала, ja nigdy o tym nie myślałam. That could also have, obviously, the masculine endings as for the Slavic languages, which don't occur in English. What does that mean if I say, I have never thought of that? That would probably mean that I am in shock, like maybe in real, very, like severe shock, maybe just I am astonished or surprised by some piece of information or something that you have told me, because I have never thought of that. So I have never, the whole my life, I have never thought of that. And I'm kind of still in this, moment of being puzzled, like I'm not even sure if I can think about it right now. I have to kind of digest what you have told me. And so this is, like just the situation of me right now being puzzled. Now, if we draw something that you probably know from the English course books, they really like those timelines. And here is now, here is the future, obviously. And if you say, I have never thought of that, that would pretty much mean that somewhere in, like starting from some point in the past. It might be theoretically, it might be your birth, it might be the moment when you really started thinking, it might be the moment when you started learning one language, for example, but you have never thought of a construction in it or something. We don't specify what happened there, but there was some more or less logical moment when you could have started about that. And from then until now, you have never thought of that. And this covers this whole time, practically until now. We don't specify if you are going to think about that in the future or not. Just, like now I'm puzzled and probably I have to think about it, but it's really interesting. Okay, I have never thought of that. Now, what happens if we say the same thing, but in the past perfect, and I say, I had never thought of that, because that's how past perfect works, right? I had never thought of that. So in the present perfect, we have the auxiliary verb have in infinitive plus the, as we call it, third form of the verb or past participle of the verb. Here we have had the same have, but in the past, and the third form of the verb. So practically what the technical difference between the present perfect and past perfect is here between those two forms. So this is present perfect. This is past perfect. Okay. Now, what does that practically mean? If I tell you that I had never thought of that, that would be the same timeline. This is future. Here is now. But I'm talking about far past, which ended in the past. And we actually could even name those points X, for example, as the same one. So if we are talking about, for example, the situation of you now listening to me about the perfect tenses, and you could say, for example, I have never thought of the fact that present perfect is actually the present, not the past. Okay, so I just told you that. You're like, yeah, really, I have never thought of that. So right now you are in the situation that you have to digest it, you have to think about it. Now, when I say that in the past perfect, that would mean that I say it like, let's say, well, I don't know, a couple of days later or maybe some years later. And then that would mean that the starting point was the same. That might be the same case. So let's say that this X point is the point where you started learning English. And now you say that you are puzzled because you have never thought of that. And this is happening here. You have never thought. But if we say that this now at some point will be, I don't know, 2025, for example, and you will say that in 2022, you watched this class and you were really astonished because I had never thought of that fact. So that would mean that here, remember I told you here that we don't specify what will happen in the future. Will you think about it? Will you not think about it? Like, it's kind of really, it's just the time frame is open. That's the point. The time frame here is open. Here, the time frame is closed. And so quite logically, when we say something in the past perfect in this context, we would say, I had never thought of that until I read something, for example, or until I heard it on the radio, or until you told me that. So here will be a very specific point. When was the stop moment of the period of time when you had never thought of that? What happened here? That would be quite a logical question. So, okay, you had never thought of that. And so what happened there? Okay. So that's one big difference between present perfect and past perfect. So the time frame is closed. And one more example that I can give you. Let me clear this all up. So if you say, in the past perfect, that's a very, very like relevant and vivid example. I had never been to Egypt, so I was very excited. Now, what do we learn from this sentence? We learn that most probably you finally went to Egypt, or at least you were really planning and you thought that this time of never having been to Egypt would stop. So how would that look on a timeline? And this obviously, this now is 2022. And let's say that we are talking about 2015 and you were born somewhere there. And so you had never been to Egypt. It should actually go literally to the trip, right? So, and here before that, you had never been to Egypt. So somewhere right before the trip, you were very excited. So this is the event X, which means I was very excited. That's the point. You can't probably say, like, I don't know, that would be really weird to assume that you had been excited all your life about going to Egypt, because we don't plan that far, right? From your birth until the trip. So we would probably say that from the moment when you were born, or at least from the moment when you remember yourself, you had never been to Egypt. The trip was planned for 2015, August, let's say. And so before this trip, I was very excited. So past perfect would emphasize this whole long period of time in the past, which had a closed time frame. Okay, we don't really know from this sentence alone what really happened in August 2015. Did you finally go or not? But even if we imagine that in 2015 something awful happened, I don't know, the airline bankrupt, or you planned your trip for 2020, for example, instead of 2015, and then you couldn't go, you definitely were not more excited, and the whole situation changes. But for that moment when you were waiting, you had never been to Egypt and you were very excited. Whereas on the contrary, if I tell you just in present perfect, I have never been to Egypt, it means that this is still true. I still have never been there. Here, most probably, I went to Egypt. Here, I definitely have not. This is still going on. This is the present. I am now in the state of having never been to Egypt. Okay? I'll stop sharing for a second to just check on the comments, because I remember that last time I wasn't checking them often enough, but okay, there are no questions. Feel free to write them if you have any on the way. Okay, so that's done. I'm checking my, my plan as always, as to never to forget anything. Okay, now one more important point about the present, about the past perfect, sorry, is that it is used to show us which event happened earlier, which of them happened later. So in the normal sense, when we tell a story and we just tell events one by one, we keep saying them in past simple. So what happened? I did this, then I did that, then I went somewhere, then I met someone, then I thought of something, then I came home, and then I went to sleep. So we would say, for example, I finished school and met my friend. So in the timeline, that would be very easy. Here is when I finished. And wherever here is I met him. But it was clearly after. So the storyline goes like in the, let's say, logical sense, if we might say so. And we don't jump from, one event to another. But imagine that you are telling me a very intricate story with a lot of details, what you did first, what you did then, and you forget about something that you had done before. Exactly what you had done before. You would naturally, in British English, you would definitely jump into past perfect. So even if we reverse just those two events, we would say, I met him after I had finished school. And then here we are. The first event that we say is I met him. Let me just maybe even use colors so that you see that. So this is the first event. And here we say it, I met him. This is event number 1 that we give in the sentence, right? And then after I had finished school is event number 2. But you see, we jump here. We kind of jump backwards and we say, I had finished. Okay, so that's the second important thing that you have to remember about past perfect. It is very, very commonly used with phrases like, for example, I realized that I had forgotten something. Had forgotten to call him. I thought I had told you because in all those situations, when we say that I realized something, so for example, a minute ago, I realized that I had forgotten to call him, but I must have forgotten before I realized that, because otherwise there would be nothing to realize. That's quite simple and logical. I hope you agree with that, right? So those verbs inevitably need past perfect. We would naturally say that. I realized that I had forgotten. I thought I had told you. So, for example, like just now we are talking and I was like, oh my God, I thought I had told you. The event that happened that I should have told you about took place a week ago, for example. And I am kind of still sure that I told you, but now you're telling me that I did not. So in the past, I was sure. I thought I had told you a week ago or a couple of days ago, for example. So that always will be this logic of just jumping kind of back on the timeline, and that's where we need past perfect. Now, a very logical question comes when I explain that to my students, and they usually ask me, so do we really need that? Do we really have to use this past perfect? Because, like if I say, I thought I told you, what does that change, Or even if we say with this, I met him, and we say I met him after I finished school or I finished my work or whatever. If I say this after I did something else, do we really need past perfect? Like, people are not stupid, they would still understand what we mean. Yes, of course, they are not stupid. Yes, of course, they will understand. And I'll tell you more, in American English, pretty much in the most of cases, unless we are really talking about very formal language or people who are obsessed with really speaking very, very correctly, So in American English, we very often skip that and we just say, I met him after I finished school, and that would be fine, because exactly the, you know, like the general logical sense and understanding and the context actually tells us definitely what it means. But again, you have to remember that language is always much wider than just, you know, how to even phrase it. I sometimes have this feeling that when we learn a new language, and I say we because, you know, when I learn a new language, I have exactly the same, you know, tendencies and questions and ideas. I don't know how it works, but when we are in this schoolish situation of learning anything, we have the same approach of asking, oh, why? Is that really important? And, you know, it's all nonsense. So I really understand why my students do that sometimes, and it's kind of a logical attempt of our brain to say, hey, look, do we really have to overcomplicate that? Because we see from the Slavic languages, for example, again, if we are comparing that to them, that we can well live without that. Although we had actually, I'm not sure about Russian, but in Polish we definitely had a construction, ja byłem, zapomniałem. And that's a clear echo of this I had forgotten. Now you can hear that in Polish only when people are, you know, like making jokes of being like super formal. But okay, that construction does not really exist now in the language, and we are puzzled. Why do we need that? But again, there are two different situations like which we have to differ. One is when you just come as a tourist, for example, somewhere. And it's fine when you actually, you don't really have to speak, you know, perfect language unless you go to France. And obviously, if you don't speak perfect French, they will never talk to you and they will always laugh at you. And, you know, they will just laugh at you and say that, oh, that was not correct. We didn't understand you. That's not actually how it works in English-speaking countries, especially that, let's face it, English is a very international language and people are used to it being spoken by a lot of different countries with different pronunciations and you know, like different actually problems and mistakes in it. So I would tend to think and say that if you go to any other country, even a natively English-speaking country, and you try to communicate in a hotel or in a restaurant, in most of the cases, people would still try to understand you. I'm not saying that it's true for 100%. Probably there are always some people who might be unpleasant or even rude. Unfortunately, it always happens, but in most of the cases, that would be fine. And no one will definitely judge you if you come to the hotel and say, for example, even if you say like, hello, I forgot my keys in the room, for example, I closed my keys in the room. No one will say, oh, I don't understand what you are talking about, sir, because you haven't used present perfect, so we don't know if we have to do anything about it. Obviously, they will understand that you are, you know, saying that for some reason, so they probably need to help you and stuff. So in those very common everyday life situations, it's not that important to speak really like perfect grammar, and that's fine. You don't have to stress overly about that. But then the second point of the same situation is that they would probably answer you still in their native language, and they would never think to like, you know, narrow down the grammar and say something simpler, because they don't even think that way. They don't think that past perfect for some reason might be more difficult than past simple, for example. For them, it's natural to speak it as they do. So that's the first thing that you have to remember about, is that you might need those constructions to understand what people are saying and why they are saying that. And then a second totally different situation is when you go to language exams. Because unfortunately, I'm sorry, but I will say that openly, as badly as English grammar is being explained in different books, which is just really, you know, it's shenanigans. What they do is that in every book you have some pieces of information. They never give you like a whole set of rules. And this is specifically frustrating for those of you who are native Russian speakers or who have ever learned Russian as a foreign language, this is probably, like, of all the languages that I have ever studied, this is probably the most analyzed one, which really gives you very, very clear rules on various different topics. And it might be a lot to remember and to understand, but you still get that. Whereas in English, it's all kind of hidden. You have to really just look for that. You have to ask various people, what do you think? How do you say? Why have you said this? Why have you said that? What do you mean by that? Then compare it to one book to another book, on one level, on another level, then exercises. And it's all, I don't know, like, it's like a mystery, you know, like a crime mystery or something, where you have to just, you know, pick up some small pieces of information, try to, you know, like, build a whole picture of it. And so my point is that with all that going on, I really just disagree with the point that when we go to English exams, we have to, you know, be just ship shape, and just speak really perfectly, and you know, use idioms, and there you have to use past perfect. And actually, when I prepare my student to IELTS or to Cambridge exams, and we write a lot of essays, I actually give them ideas what sentences you could use, whatever topic you write, so that you would have to use past perfect, because if you use it, you get more points on the grammar, most probably. So that's really an important thing to remember about. Again, if you just want to use this language for your fun, maybe you don't have to at least really get stressed with that. Definitely not. Like, fun and stress, like, they don't go together. But if you want to go and live there, for example, which might mean that you will most probably go to some migration offices, you might need to write an official letter, you might need to communicate, I don't know, tax office, or even your landlord, actually, in the first letter, for example, that you write or something, you might really need a lot of, you know, like, posh and expensive constructions, if I might say so. So here is where past perfect comes really, you know, comes in handy, and you can't deny that. So obviously, if you forget about it when you speak and you just say, I met him after I finished work, I don't think that anyone would really look at you and like, what did you say? What does that mean? I don't understand you. No. But if you are preparing yourself for an exam, you have to remember about that tense, and you cannot skip it, because you will really lose points, and your writing will never look as elegant and eloquent as with the past perfect. And there are two more constructions where we really need past perfect, and we can't skip it. The first one is the third conditional, when I say that if I had not known that, I wouldn't have been able to help you, for example. We are going to cover conditionals separately. And the second construction is when we say, I wish, about the past, which is very actually close to conditionals. And I think that I might combine that in one class, those constructions about I wish. So when I say, for example, that yesterday I missed my train, so I arrived late, I might say, I wish I hadn't missed the train. Because I'm speaking about the past, I have to put that in past perfect. But again, I'm not going to, you know, explain those constructions right now. I'm just reminding you that even if you don't use like a pure past perfect in a separate sentence, you will still need that badly for other important constructions. Now, let's move on to other like similar tenses, because I would like to just, you know, cover all those perfective tenses now, so that, you know, it doesn't leave any questions for you. So the first one is present perfect continuous. So again, remember, we have like present perfect simple, we could say, when I can say, I've just tried to call him. How many times have I done that? Most probably one. Now, if you imagine the situation that you had some bad news, or you are stressed about someone and you keep calling and calling and calling and trying again and again, you would say, so this was just present perfect, right? To make it clear. So in present perfect continuous, we would say, I've been trying to call him for 30 minutes, for example. How many times have I done that in those 30 minutes? We don't know, probably like many times, like maybe 10, maybe 20, 30, depending on the situation. But it's definitely not one time, it's many times. And what does this continuous form mean here? I've been trying to do it. It means that I still am trying. So when I say I've just tried to call him once, we don't know if I'm going to call him again, because maybe we don't have any more time. So I've just tried to call him. He never answered, so that's done. We don't know where he is, but maybe not that important. When I say I've been trying to call him for 30 minutes, quite probably there might be some drama going on. So I just emphasize that I'm not even getting off the phone. I'm just, like dialing him again and again. And most probably I will try to do that, or I just, the fact that I have been trying for such a long time, I might emphasize my emotions. So I've been trying to call him for 30 minutes. So I'm very stressed. I'm tired. I'm nervous. I've had enough. I'm really angry with him because I've been trying to call him for 30 minutes and he never answers his phone. So there will be some emotions going on here. Whereas I've just tried to call him, just gives me the information that it has just happened very, very recently. And so we know that he doesn't answer, but there is not necessarily any drama going on there. Whereas I've been trying to call him, probably there will be some emotions behind that. For some reason, I emphasize that I've been doing that for such a long time, and kind of I'm still doing that. So with the present perfect continuous, very, very often we would use the specification of time. How long has it been going on? Okay. And remember that when we say in just pure present perfect, simple, like this, I've just tried to call him, the time frame is open. So, the situation kind of still hasn't changed. Now, but it happened some time ago. But when we say something in the present perfect continuous, we emphasize that it is not over, it is still going on. So here we might need to undertake some actions. Remember that example that I gave you in the last class, like I have left my bag at home, so we have to come back. So I don't have money, so I left something else, like I have left something else with that bag. Whereas when I say that I've been trying to call him, you just clearly see the image of me sitting right now and dialing, again and again. And we very often use that in sentences like, I've been thinking. We should go on a holiday. I've been thinking, again, and we don't say for how much, for how long, for how much time I have been thinking, but we just say that it's not just I've thought, because I have thought of that would mean that I have thought of that once, then I made some judgment, some assumption, some conclusion, whatever. But I've been thinking means that, I've had this thought for a long time and I'm still thinking about it. And so now I'm telling you that, and maybe we can think about that together, because I still, I'm all in those thoughts. I've been thinking we should probably go on a holiday. Okay. And the second construction where this is very, very commonly used is we've been living here for a year now. And it clearly means that we still live in this place. Okay. He has been working here for a couple of months now. So about those like lifelong events, if I might say so, about working, about living, and remember that state verbs still don't have continuous forms. So we cannot say, I've been knowing him. We can only say, I have known him. For 20 years, for example. But know is a state verb. So it can't have a continuous form. We can't say, I have been knowing him. That would be very, very wrong. So with those, we still stay in the present perfect simple. And we say, I've known him for 20 years. Okay? Now, one more very interesting thing that I want to tell you here is how the natives really use those tenses. I've recently had a very interesting conversation with my British friend, and she's like really, like 100% British native speaker. She was born and raised up in the UK. She's a UK citizen. She went there to school, to university. She's lived there all her life. And so, and she's a well-educated woman. She's a teacher, actually. So it's not that, she doesn't understand grammar or she keeps saying really weird things. But that was really a very interesting point when I was talking to her about something, and I asked her about some struggle, if she's having some struggle or not. And her answer was, she said, I was living in a very small house for 12 years. So nothing can annoy me now. Or anymore, something like that. To annoy, if anyone of you doesn't know that, to annoy means to make me irritated, to make me tired, to make me really like, oh God, I don't want that anymore. Just stop. Okay, so that's to annoy. And so she said, I was living in a very small house for 12 years. Sorry. I was like, why have you said that in past continuous? To me, that was very, very logical, that she should have used present perfect and to say, I have lived in a very small house for 12 years. And yes, that could be possible. So you can emphasize for how long it has, taken, for how much time it has taken, when it's not going on anymore. Because clearly, if she said, I have been living in a very small house for 12 years, that would mean that she's still living in a very small house, which is not true. And I knew that she's not relating to the house where she's living right now. So she could have said in this context, I've lived in a very small house for 12 years. And that was a very, very logical assumption for me, to say that, yeah, so I have this experience, this this knowledge, so I can tell you now, here is this open time frame and the sense of the frame, that nothing can annoy me anymore, nothing can annoy me now, or nothing can annoy me now in this situation. And she said, yeah, actually I could have said that in the present perfect, and you are right, but I wanted to emphasize that I was living for 12 years. Like this was like I was kind of deeply in that process when I was saying that I was living in very uncomfortable conditions. And she said that she could have actually also said, and that would be equal, I lived in a very small house for 20 years. For 12, why do I keep saying 20? For 12 years. Yeah. And here the time frame would be closed because she doesn't live there anymore. And for her, it's like a, like obviously closed event. And that wouldn't puzzle anyone, with questions like, oh, did she die? Because she, she's saying that about herself. So how can her time frame be closed? But the time frame of living in that house would be over. That was a whole event, and just, that's that. I lived in a very small house for 12 years. And here we are, according to all the books and the general understanding of the language that we have and we analyze, in course books, in classes, in various explanations by native teachers. They would all say that the best option would be, I have lived in a very small house for 12 years. And here we are, we have a well-educated native speaker who says, I was living in a very small house for 12 years. And it was not like, I asked her and she was like, oh yeah, obviously, why have I said that? That's weird. No, she was like very, very convinced that this is exactly what she wanted to say. She wanted to emphasize the process and the intensity of this living in this very small house for so many years. So my message here for you is, again, don't stress. Unfortunately, the only thing where you really have to stress is when you go to exams, because again, no one is asking you what you actually thought. They would rather, judge you by their sense of common sense, if I can say so. That they would probably say that no, you are underlying the experience here, so it must be present perfect, and you misused the tense here. No one will ask you any questions. So I don't want to give this impression as if I'm blaming the natives for everything in the world, because I'm not. And, actually every language learning process is really very, very draining and very, very difficult, but at the same time, very interesting. So I rather encourage you to being curious and to ask those questions. And rather than, sitting here right now and saying, oh, those stupid natives, she made a mistake. She didn't know what she was saying. And, even they don't understand how it works. I asked her, why did you say that? And now I am sure that at least for her, these three constructions were completely equal in the general sense, but this past continuous, I was living in this very small house. Was giving the exact, emphasis on the process of living. So that's why she used that. Was it wrong? I don't know. I wouldn't say that I can be the judge of that, I'll just leave it there. You might write in the comments what you think about it. Would you say like that? Would you agree with her or not? But I'm just, sharing quite an interesting, I think, curious story from real life experience. So that's that. And now, if we talked about the present perfect continuous, that I have been living somewhere, I have been doing something for some time, there obviously comes also past perfect continuous. Which is again kind of a mirror of present perfect continuous, but to the past. So I can say, for example, so we had this sentence, I have been trying to call him for 2 hours. In the past perfect continuous, we would say, I had been trying to call him for 3 hours. And then again, on the timeline, where here is now, there was some event, something that caused me to want to call him. And I tried once, and then I had been trying for exactly 3 hours. And that's that. But the time frame is closed again. Because from now, I definitely know that there was a stop. We don't know what the stop was. Did he finally answer or not? Did he come or not? Was there any more reason to call him or not? But from the perspective of now, I definitely know and remember that it was 3 hours, and those 3 hours passed, and then I stopped calling him for whatever reason. But the time frame is closed. Whereas when I say I have been trying to call him, it is definitely open. I might still be trying. Here is I have been trying to. And here, from the moment when I started until now, it's also 3 hours. But we don't know how much will be here. And will there be anything else? Here, we are positive. We definitely know that it was only 3 hours. And I had been trying to call him for 3 hours. So you could say, naturally, that I was trying to call him for 3 hours, but he never answered. So we went on. And that's just this general, again, sense of, telling a story. So we heard some dreadful news, then we were trying to call him. I was trying to call him for 3 hours. He never answered. So I went home, I met him, and everything was fine. Why we would use I had been trying to call him for 3 hours? Because, again, we would continue right here. For example, we would say, I was very tired because I had been trying to call him for 3 hours, or I was already panicking because I had been trying to call him for 3 hours. And we emphasize that it was long, it was a permanent process. And that's exactly just as much as I would say now that I have been trying to call him for 3 hours and he still doesn't answer. We just put that back into the past and say, I had been trying, and that was such a stressful moment, like I had been trying when he finally came, for example. Okay, so actually, I really tend to think that past perfect continuous and past perfect simple are really quite simple tenses to use, like as opposed to present perfect, when we might have those questions of whether or not we should use it really now in this case or another. Past perfect and past perfect continuous are much more like fixed and sure that yes, they should be used like that. I'll just check once again. No questions, no comments. So then let's move on. And the same situation, one more example that I can give you is if I tell you, for example, we saw a child that had been clearly crying for hours. Here we go. We saw this child at one moment of time. This child had been clearly crying for hours, and this child was still crying at that moment. But we could say that it was not as if they tried just at that moment or a minute ago, but they had been crying for hours. Their eyes were completely red and swollen up and everything. We don't know what happened next, actually, because unless I continue the story, we don't know. Just from the sentence, We can't judge that. We don't know if that was the moment when the child finally stopped crying, or maybe they were crying for another hour or two, which would be really dreadful. But still, we don't know that. Okay, I'm just giving you a sign that this had been happening for hours right before I saw this child. And then, the story goes on, and then we figure out probably why I said it and what significance it had. That's that about the perfective tenses. And the last point that I wanted to give you today is quite a simple one, but very important, which is very, very, very often mixed up by my Slavic students, is how do we say about repetitive events in the past? Because I hope you remember from our previous class when I told you that past simple is always this perfective tense. So when we say I saw him, it happened once. So this is what we call совершенный вид, aspekt dokonany. Ja jego uwidziała, ja go zobaczyłam. And it happened once. So I hear a lot of those constructions, for example, when I was a child. I went to my grandmother every summer. That's wrong, okay? We don't say that. Because that literally means, kiedy ja byłam dzieckiem, ja pojechałam do mojej babci co lato. Когда я была ребенком, я поехала к моей бабушке каждое лето. This went in a perfective sense. And every summer, they just exclude each other. They cannot exist in one sentence. It makes no sense. It literally makes no sense. So did they go once, or was this happening every summer? And theoretically, when I start correcting my students, they say, okay, not I went, I was going. But I was going, again, that's happening in one specific moment in time. So when you say, when I was a child, I was going to my grandmother every summer, that would mean, когда я была ребенком, я ехала к бабушке каждое лето. Kiedy ja byłam dzieckiem, ja jechałam do babci każde lato. That still doesn't sound perfect. How it should sound is a construction which I don't know why, but it's very rarely taught in our schools. I don't know, I am just puzzled because it is in the course books actually, but in general, I really have this feeling that this is the most missed point in grammar. And I actually talked to various native speaking teachers as well, and they all say that here, for some reason, like most of the countries that just don't get this in English, but it's very, very simple. So what we would say correctly is, when I was a child, I used to go to my grandmother every summer. And this used to means that it was a repetitive action. And one more thing that is important about used to is that it is not happening now. We don't know why. Maybe just simply because I'm not a child anymore and I don't have such long summer vacation. Maybe because sadly my grandmother died. Maybe she just moved to our city and I don't have where to go because she lives next door. Maybe, I went to live to another country and I don't go to her. There might be different scenarios and reasons why I don't go to her now. But the bottom line is, I don't go to her now every summer. Okay? And that could be also used about our habits and likes, for example. So I can say, I used to like dark chocolate. And that's true. I could just eat a bar of dark chocolate just, as a sandwich. But when I say I used to, it clearly means, but not now, not anymore. I don't like it now. I just don't, for whatever reason. And if I say that I used to like dark chocolate, it means that I don't like it anymore. It does not mean that I just don't eat it because maybe the doctors said that I shouldn't. I don't like it anymore. Okay? And then when we say about those general, like kind of the introduction line to something that used to be happening in the past, we use used to. Then when we go into specific, like more detailed events, we would naturally use would. So we would say, for example, when I was a child, I used to go to my grandmother every summer. And then we would continue that with, for example, we would go to the forest every day. And then I would help her with her housework. So this used to would be really this introduction line, and would be a continuation of details, most naturally. Of course, you can change them and say, I used to go to my grandmother every summer, we used to go to the forest, and then I would help her with her housework. That wouldn't be really, like a disaster. You could do that. But like most commonly, how it is used in that way. The same with this dark chocolate. I can say that I used to like dark chocolate. I would eat it every day, and my parents would tell me every day that it's not a healthy habit, for example. Okay, so this is a like very, very simple point, but you have to remember about that, because it's wrong. It's totally wrong to say this. When I was a child, I went to my grandmother every summer. Just don't do that. Please don't do that. It's really wrong. It makes no sense. It's just, like I'm lost for words, frankly speaking. So as always, I will give you suggestions of the exercises from both Murphy books that you can do on those topics, so that you can practice that if you wish and if you like. I hope you do. And if you don't have any questions, which I don't see so far in the chat box, I think we'll bring that to an end, and see you next time at exactly the same day, the same time. We'll cover next grammatical topics. Thank you for your attention, and see you. Bye-bye.